I got started in yoga in 1987 in New York City, and it was a process where yoga didn't really get its hooks in me right away. I worked at a very small cafe in the Lower East Side called Life Cafe, and the reason that's significant at all is because the owner of Life Cafe is a man named David Life, who went on to open the Jivamukti Yoga Centers, and he and his partner Sharon Gannon, they got into yoga, and at that time in the 80s, a lot of drug use was happening in the East Village, and it seemed like at this cafe you were either doing heroin or yoga. And after a while, I think David got tired of having so many of the staff people at the restaurant just high, vomiting behind the bar during their shift, that he made the suggestion that, we should consider doing yoga. And that's what I did. And I got into yoga. I didn't stop doing drugs right away. But after a while, it wasn't really a big process for me. I started doing yoga, and the cigarettes didn't taste good, and then the alcohol didn't taste good, and then the drugs didn't taste good. And before I knew it, it became a lifestyle. Nothing altered in me yet. I just liked to practice. I felt better in my body. And it was a very physical practice for me. It was not a spiritual practice. I tolerated the spirituality within the practice. I was one of those people that kind of anxiously waited for Shavasana to be over until I can leave. But I do remember a real turning point. Also in New York City, it was, I was walking down 12th Street, and I was miserable in the morning. For whatever reason, I was miserable. I decided to take a yoga class, as I do. And after class, I leave, and it's snowing. And I remember walking in the snow, and there's nothing more beautiful than New York City in its first snow. And I stopped, and I tracked this odd sensation in my body. I didn't really understand the mind-body connection at that time at all, but I knew that there was something different in my body. And I remember taking a breath and thinking, what is that sensation? What do I feel? And I realized I felt happy, genuinely happy. And I thought, well, that's odd, because nothing had really changed in the couple of hours that I walked to the studio, and I'm walking home from the studio, except that I practiced yoga. And I remember thinking, and it just seems so naive now, but I remember thinking, could it have been that practice that I feel so at ease? I had a sense that everything was just unfolding, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that this trajectory was almost inevitable, and that I couldn't avoid any of it. I just had to kind of surrender to it. I didn't even know where that thought. And I decided then, tentative, went back to the yoga class, and I heard the teacher in a completely different way. Every word that teacher said just landed in my body, and I felt emotional and a little bit scared, and I didn't understand why what she was saying was landing so positively in my body. I didn't understand why I knew what she was saying was true. It just seemed to affirm something within my body that I think I had known all along. I didn't realize until a couple more years later, that mind-body connection, and that I had so much tension, and I was so addicted to my tension, that it took a lot of physical yoga to break up the addiction that I had to that structure, to free me up enough to actually feel and to connect to my vulnerability, which ultimately moved me towards a moment, a glimpse into surrender. And that was the moment of happiness. That was the moment I heard the teacher differently. And I think it was from that point on, I was both enthralled by the practice of yoga and utterly terrified. And I still am to this day, utterly terrified and grateful. Every time I get on the mat, just absolutely grateful for all that it reveals. I moved to Los Angeles from New York probably in the early 90s, and I had a sense that the health and wellness community in Los Angeles was going to be a little bit more alternative and open-minded than it was in New York. And I had heard that yoga was, a little bit more of a big deal out there. I got a job behind the desk at a studio called Yoga Works, but I never had any ambitions to be a yoga teacher at all. It never occurred to me that was even a possibility. I just wanted to practice, and I couldn't afford to practice. So by getting a job at the school, it would give me access to classes all day long, which it did. But I do think a massive turning point was, this was probably 90, maybe 93. I'm in a yoga pose. It's a pose called pigeon. It's a hip opener. And I had seen people over the years get emotional in a yoga class. I had watched people cry, and I always often thought, it seems so indulgent. Why are they crying? What could possibly be wrong? And if they are so upset, why don't they just take it home? And I didn't understand the phenomenon of the mind body. One day I'm in a yoga class. I'm in a hip opener. The teacher is going on and on about something, and I don't even know what it was. I never paid attention. I was just in my own experience. Completely dissociative, by the way. But still, nonetheless, I wasn't paying attention to what the teacher was saying. And there was this moment that happened. This wave of energy went through me, and I gasped a little bit. This happened, oh, what was that? And then it happened again. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to cry. And an emotional person like that, I certainly wouldn't be in a yoga class. And my heart started to race, and limbs started to tingle, and I got a little bit scared. All this anxiety started to come up for me, and I finally had to leave the room. I went into the bathroom and just started to sob out of nowhere. And my hands were shaking, my arms were shaking. After a few moments, I got it together. When I went back into class, at this point, they're now on the other side. And so I get into the pose, and it was as if the teacher was speaking only to me. I felt like everything that he was saying, it actually freaked me out a little bit. I thought he was reading my mind. I got really overwhelmed by the words that he was saying were affirming my experience. And what I realize now, the teacher had been saying pretty much the same thing every single day. But I had never discharged energy like that. I had never actually had that experience of understanding the way in which our bodies contain trauma. And I had held on to this trauma for so long that it took, at this point, I'm a practitioner, I'm 5 years in, and it took 5 years of pretty intense yoga, of aligning my body, of going into those uninvestigated parts of my musculature, of bringing prana into those areas, of landing these seeds of perception that were living in my cells waiting to erupt. And finally that moment happened in that pose where the energy shifted and I woke up. And I think it was in that moment something shifted for me where I realized I had always thought of myself as a seeker. I had been on the path seeking for a long time. And it was during that period where I started to really look at the mind-body connection and understand energy in a very different way. This didn't happen instantaneously. Obviously, it's a long process. But I no longer consider myself a seeker because I believe that the moment that we suggest that we're seeking, what we're looking for is something that exists outside of ourselves. That what we're here to do is to remember who we truly are. And in doing that, we awaken to that which is already within us, which is love. That's our essence. And the only thing that blocks us from that essence is our humanity. It's our fear, our grief, our rage, our shame, our guilt, our desire, all of the stuff that makes us so fabulously wonderful, complex, and flawed. Once we're able to be in relationship to the shadow parts of our humanity, it allows spaciousness for us to also be in relationship to our light. And so the yoga practice allowed me to release the tension, allow the energy, the suppressed emotional energy that was stuck in my cells to come up and out, gave me space to be in relationship with that energy, to begin to reconcile some of the narratives or stories that I had around those particular experiences and why they were stuck in my body. And through a very deep process that includes forgiveness and acceptance and all of that unbearable, impossible, and necessary stuff, it led to a space of just acceptance and surrender. And that's the awakening that I think that I'm continuing to have personally, that allows me to see myself and every human being on this planet doing the best we can with what little we know based on the trauma that we've experienced and the access to tools that we have. And the more that I could see people with us from a space of empathy, the more that I'm able to be present to their experience without getting triggered myself. But I can't do that unless I'm empathetic to my own experience. And so the practice of yoga is one of the many tools that we can access, that it can allow us space to go into a deeper level of inquiry, to hold ourselves accountable for our own humanity, our own life, our own narrative, our own story, so that we can heal. And in healing, I hopefully it awakens us to see that we're all here just to learn what love is. And the rate in which that happens is between each soul and the God of their own understanding.